Rises in the fourth CVP. The next talk will be about the Pellet Zero program, the Brazilian experience, and will be presented by Miguel Bahiense, President of Plastivida. Welcome, Miguel Bahiense. Have an excellent talk.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in this event, which is so important for our industry. We hope that we can show you a little bit of our work in an experience that we can say is in our governance, right? As an industry and as a productive part of the economy. I'm going to be talking about the Zero Pellet Initiative. And so first, what is pellets or Zero Pellets? This is a global program, and we'll understand it in more details now. And it supports industries and companies in the plastics production chain to implement their operations with good practices for maintenance and containment of pellets, flakes, and powdered resins, in order to achieve zero loss of these products to the environment. It has consolidated itself as one of the main environmental protection actions in our industry. And when I talk about our industry, as I said in the beginning, this is a process that we learned over time. This is something that as an industry, we need to do. It's our contribution to make plastics not go into the oceans and into marine life and so on. We understand that this is one of the things that the industry really needs to get involved in. And it really doesn't depend on anyone else. It only depends on the industry itself. So what is a pellet? A pellet is a plastic resin. Fabiana Quiroga gave a presentation earlier defining it. She briefly mentioned what a plastic pellet is, but it's basically small spheres of plastics used to produce plastic artifacts. So for example, if you are making a straw or a cup, they're all made from this pellet, from a granule of plastic, which goes into a machine that makes it into a different product. Our goal is to work in containing these granules before they become a plastic artifact. So this is our main goal, and that's why I say that this is in our governance. It's not related to consumers or to the government, which are important parts of the process, right, of containing plastics and preventing plastics from going to the sea. It's also related to a third stakeholder, which is the industry itself. And that's why I say that this is in our governance. This is what a pellet looks like. These are white pellets, but they can be any color. They can be red, they can be black. And they take the right color according to the need and to the transformation they undergo. So if you want a red bottle, and if you can use a red pellets and so on and so forth. We focus on pellets because they're more real in our industry. They're the most widely used product. But just as a side note, before this pellet appears, you have a resin, and a resin is a powder. Depending on the kind of plastic you're discussing, it makes more sense for it to be sold as a pellet. It really will depend on what kind of plastic it is, but it can also be a resin or a powder. A resin or powder is also included in this process. Well, as we said briefly, how does this program work? I'm going to tell you a little bit about our history. It includes several stakeholders who also developed parallel initiatives. And here we are putting all of these initiatives together in a single area in Brazil. So in 2011, there was an international conference on marine debris in Honolulu, and they set out commitments for a global effort to reduce the impacts of marine litter. This involved several governments. It wasn't started then. The movement actually started in the 70s, as Professor Alexander has been saying, but the Honolulu strategy was an interesting landmark, because this is when companies started to focus on this area. So as a result of this strategy, and at the invitation of Plastics Europe, which is an association that discusses the social environmental impacts of plastics, the American Chemical Council included Plastivida as a signatory to the Declaration of the Global Plastics Associations for Solutions on Marine Litter. So this was a moment in which there were many stakeholders. The industry felt that it needed to be in the process, and it became a signatory to this declaration. And that's when we started discussing the theme in Brazil, first with the institution itself, and then with our members. And then we started working with partnerships with other stakeholders in the global plastics industry. There are currently over 150 initiatives for this kind of action to implement solutions in Brazil. And Brazil also participates in this process. So as a movement, we naturally feel challenged to start working on this topic in Brazil. And we found a great partner, which was the Oceanographic Institute from the University of São Paulo. There's another speaker from there who is speaking in another room right now, but this basically shows how important this topic was in Brazil. This was signed in 2012 as a consequence of the Honolulu strategy, and it was renewed in 2017 for another 5 years. So it's very good to have partners in this process. Our objectives are split into 5 pillars, because of course, it's important to talk about how information is given to the press, how it's communicated to society. So we started on the 5 main pillars, which you see right now. First, to get to know and evaluate the characteristics of marine pollution in Brazil. This was one of the main starting points for us. We did a lot of research in Brazil so that we could have a good understanding of what it was. We needed to scale the relevance of Brazil to the global scenario, so understand how Brazil is working on this entire scenario. Also, identify and quantify the origin of waste in the seas and beaches of Brazil. So we went out to the field, to the beaches, to see how and which kinds of plastics are going to the sea. Identifying temporal series for the data, which became very important in this process. And the 5th, and probably the main pillars, is that when you have all of this scientific understanding that is developed, understood, then we start environmental education actions for society. It basically becomes an essential part of the process. So this timeline is not necessarily for you to read right now. This presentation will be made available if you want to download the presentation later, but it's a timeline that I put here to show exactly how we internalize the strategy in Brazil and how we started creating a path forward for Pellet Zero. So again, as I said, we started with the Honolulu commitment. In 2012, we signed an agreement with the University of São Paulo. And not only did we begin studies, but we also started activities in 13 beaches in the state of São Paulo. This is where the process began. In 2013, we were expanding the work area, and that included the states of Bahia and the North Coast, where we continued to monitor plastic waste in 3 beaches, which is something we also did in the state of Alagoas. So the process became much better structured, and we started seeing with our partners that, for example, the Caxias do Sul University also had a study like this in the coast of that state. And it saw the variety of plastics that were available, that were there in each area. So the same plastics that appear in the beaches of São Paulo are related to fishing. So for example, fishing nets, when they rip and they fall into the ocean. But in the northeast of Brazil, we normally see plastics from tourism, basically, using the beach, which is a common good for all. But in the south of Brazil, during that time of the year, that only represented 14% of the plastics. We saw a lot of glass and aluminum. So the way in which plastic affects the beaches is different in the northeast of Brazil and in the south, probably because of the weather and how the beach is used. But the materials that people also consume in the south are related to other raw materials. And here in the northeast, they come from different sources. So that gives us an understanding of the entire chain so that we can have better environmental education campaigns. In 2014, we started the Zero Pellet Program. We brought it in from the US. It was created in the US. And of course, we had to adapt it to the Brazilian reality. That's when we started creating partnerships. We know that, for example, Aliplástico has also worked in adapting the information on this topic to the Brazilian reality. And we started going into this subject. Plastivida decided to create its own committee in 2015, where we involve all the stakeholders in this context. And in 2016, this committee became a plastic forum. So everything that was done by other institutions and other companies is now being used in the same single movement, where we also have scientific research. We still analyze how plastics are sent to the sea, but this allows us to really focus on the goals of zero pellets. Then we also start environmental education campaigns. We created the Understand Waste campaign, which is actually a booth that we started during the Rio Olympics, where we talk to society about plastics. So this is something that we developed again over 2018 and 2019 in environmental education. And by 2020, I'm sorry, I didn't pass my slides before, but in 2020, we launched the Zero Pellet Program. So we started doing this online because of the pandemic, but we were able to involve several companies in this process. As I said, currently we have 18 signatories in the Plastics Forum, and that includes unions, class representatives, industries, which signed a declaration of intentions. And the Understand Waste project is still one of the main pillars in our educational program. And we can officially launch the new visual identity for our forum. So this is the old logo on your left and the new one on the right. This is the first time that we are showing this in a forum. So that's another milestone for us. And why do we apply zero pellet in Brazil? So what types of plastics do we see in the seas? About 90% of the volume of plastics found in the sea are macroplastics. 80% of them come from land due to excessive consumption, tourism. These are some of the ways in which plastics go into the sea along with other kinds of waste. And we can't forget that rivers go to the ocean, right? So even in a city like São Paulo, which is land-bound, has several rivers which dump this into the ocean. And not necessarily the ocean close to where you are. So 20% are come from activities carried out at sea, such as fishing and transportation, which can be tourist or merchant transportation. And a very small percentage are microplastics. So what is the relationship between this 90 and 10%? Well, some things need to be taken into consideration. First, location. Port areas, islands, places without basic sanitation are some of the most common areas where we see plastics. So we break it down by size or by mass when it comes to macroplastics, but with microplastics, we talk about quantity of items. In the case of microplastics, we are usually taking measurements of below half a centimeter. So it's not as visible, but it is there. And we also consider it to different times of the year. For example, it's very common to see pictures of a very dirty beach after New Year's with all kinds of material because of how things are consumed during those times. Water currents are also very important in this process. So pellets are in the microplastics universe, and as I said, they are not assessed by mass, but by quantity of items. And studies show the presence of pellets in different locations, ranging from negligible quantities to 16% levels. This is usually when we study ports. That's one of the areas in which logistics for companies that work in transportation between manufacturers and buyers have accidents occasionally. This is an area where the risk of accidents is higher, and then it falls directly into the sea, which is different from what would happen in a road accident. So we noticed that most locations that we assessed with the University of São Paulo had a very low amount of pellets. In Santos is where we saw the highest amount. But this was our first conclusion. This is in our governance, so we need to act, we need to work. As I said, there are other locations, factories, warehouses, and land transportation that play a role. So it's very important to maintain this in our governance. As I said, this was something that we did. At first, we diagnosed pellet losses in the production chains in the port, and we adapted the guidance material to Brazil. We created a partnership with these institutions and some companies like Braskem and Dow, and also Abiplas. So this was a joint effort with the industry, and it was even innovative because this is much more difficult in other areas, right? It's not something that you observed and built together. It's very important to have companies participating in this process. Our goal is to reduce losses, and the process, as we'll see ahead, requires continuous improvement. You need to systematize the system, and it is scalable, which makes it a very interesting process because it provides transparency and gives you reliability, trustability, and complies to all compliance policies in companies, which really need this in order to be implemented.
Of course, there's the support of the licensees. We can see this here in Brazil. We have the obligation of doing all this follow-up of the implementation of each one of these steps. We therefore strengthen the collaborators because they are the actors. You can think of the industry as a city, and then you have all the other people that are leaders and the collaborators. And then we saw several discussions this morning to involve all these players in this concept so that we allow the plastic and other raw materials to attend these prerequisites of circularity. This morning, someone spoke, if I'm not mistaken, it was Fabiana, that this is a key point. There's no point. She was talking about, well, not always a certain sector of a company talks with another when they launch a product. And one of the demands of ours in this process is everyone is part. It doesn't matter if you work in the administration, if you work in the industrial area, you have to be part of this process with a solution, seeing as a pellet on the floor of the plant, identify where it is, how it happened, where it came from, and especially contribute to solve the solution so there's not a second pellet present in that area. The implementation process can be by company in all the units, or it can be in a certain unit inside that company. So it's very important that we have a focal point, a general focal point, if we're talking about companies, so that person that's going to be the contact between the collaborators and the licensee as a disseminator of all this process. And if necessary and useful for the company, this focal point can be per unit. So we have this flexibility of working not to so that one person doesn't work much more than another. So we're adapted to do it this way. So the company signs an agreement per company or per unit, also a confidentiality agreement, which is signed with the company, because we have to have the credibility that we are doing a validation process in a very correct way with all this complexity that we described. This project is not finite, it's a circle. So we do the renewal at each established period, and then we go to 2 years where it's then a 5-star company following all the process. When this agreement is signed, they get 1 star, and as they progress, they get 2, 3, up to 4 stars when the first step finishes, and the 5 stars where they are a full-blown licensee. We who works with our licenses are Abiplas and Plastivida. There's no problem having 2 or 3 licensors, but we've noticed that there's a need for situations such as these of applying just one mechanism of implementation. And this is worked in the circular forum. So they have their the Abiplasci and the Plastivida to implement this program. And then we move with our own way of working, but always in this scenario. So all of this has been approved. The owners of the OCS, the Plastic Industry Association, and the American Chemistry Council, which are the owners of the brand. The OCS means it's where the Pellet Zero program is. So it's a Pellet Zero program. So this platform is not yet ready, but we hope that in 1 month it will be live and we will be able to publicize it so that we can evolve and allow the companies to access the platform so they can download programs of implementation materials, knowledge of the forms, checklist, diagnosis, and the beginning of the planning. So this will be the face of the platform, how it looks. You put the name of your company. If they're going to work just with a unit, or they can decide to do this, you define the segment and you define who's going to be the certifying body. And then we establish contact, and this will be one of the pillars that we will use to allow more and more companies to become OCS Pellet Zero in our country. These are the manuals. The first one is the manual to implement the program. It's the manual of the program. Then we have the implementation manual, and then you can see two different formats. We've learned in this process that we cannot focus just on the manufacturer, whether he's petrochemical, whether he's transformed, because among them there's a group which is very important, which are the people from the logistics operation. Um, to whether it be to store, whether it be for the logistic transport. So it can be, and these actors have to be within the process. And so we decided at a certain point also to generate an implementation manual for this type of role in our productive chain. Now I am going to quickly show you how to implement this process. I'm going to show this to you on the next screen. And here we can see the following. The first thing, the company that's interested in implementing this, they will get into contact with any of the licensors, and they're going to know that they're going to work with the same methodology as we mentioned. We've created a certification based on different steps, and each step has a start. The first one is when you agree to this, you already get your first start. And you can choose. You can do the process the way that you want. The company can do it by itself, or they can do the implementation process with the help of a consulting firm or the licensor itself. We have a partnership with the Oceanographic Institute of the University of São Paulo. We work together, and so it whatever format, we work with the same material, with the same documentation. Having taken this commitment, so we go to the second um, part. This material is all submitted, and then we go to the third step, and this certification, when it's received, it is the sense, the cyclic sense of moving forward, of evolving. And so we have a plan with the approval of the licensor, and then we have a report for the implementation. Once it's approved, then the company gets the fourth star, and then they have the certificate Pellet Zero, and this is concluded. This process is renewed every 2 years. So 2 years is a period that we believe that is sufficient to evolve this implementation in a satisfactory manner. No one has the power of police to say, no, it has to be in 2 years. There are units that are newer, others that are older, and some physical building or buying equipment. We know that not everything can be done at once, so we're very understanding in order to establish a period of 2 years for the establishment of this. Once we've done this, we can move to the fifth star. And the fifth star is the certification, and the basic difference between this first and second phase is that the second phase, the company has to have an external audit. They can choose or an an audit about all the results established in this process. So all the implementation steps are informed to the forum, and the forum will then uh, publicize this to the results of this process. Braskem is the first one that has these 5 stars. They obtained their certification now in Mexico in March. And so we have all this scenario where we publicize the actions that were carried out by the licensed company. So it's just an additional step. It's a decision of the company, and they can move forward the way they want, either doing an internal audit or contracting an external audit to become a blue OCB. So they will then get this blue certificate. This process in Brazil started with the voluntary commitment to promote and increase the reach of the circular economy in plastic packaging in Brazil, launched by the chemical industry. And one of the pillars is that of all these companies that signed this agreement should implement this Pellet Zero program in their programs until 2020. And there's only one company that we're negotiating that it will become, we hope, the sooner the better, a licensed company in Brazil. This year, rapidly is the agreement. This is, for me, in my opinion, this was the catapulting of the implementation of all this process in our productive chain in the country. So the scope of the pellet zero petrochemical, the transformation of the service people. You can't just think of the loss of this in the industry, but we have to think of the whole production chain. And this has to the status of the program here. We have a portal of 25 companies that are already in the process. The launch was June last year, and we have 3 companies that have 1 star. They signed the agreement. 8 companies that have 2 stars. Sorry, 13 have 1 star, 8 have 2 stars. One has 3 stars. 2 companies have received 4, which is the implementation report, and then they have to decide if they're going to become a blue certified. And one company, as I mentioned, which is Braskem, which already has their 5 stars. So we work hard in this process. We have already reached 23 companies that are licensed, and here just the logos of these companies for us to show that these are companies that are extremely committed with all the productive chain, transforming logistics, the petrochemical people working in this process. Here, just for you to see, on the left-hand side, you have the certification. In the middle of the certification, you have the logo and the name of the company. And at the bottom, there's the star. And as you evolve, you get the 2nd star, the 3rd, the 4th, until you get the blue certification, where you get the final certification with 5 stars. And then from then on, the process will continue being cyclic, in the sense that we continue to evolve and guaranteeing that the company is going to continue to work on this topic. I'd like to thank you you guys for the fourth Congress of Plastic. It's for me, it's very good to participate. I've been speaking other opportunities in this Congress, so I would like to leave a message. Your participation is important, and as I said, this is the only type of waste that only depends on us to stop this going into the seas. It's within our governance, it's within our scope, our goodwill, need, responsibility, and commitment. And I'm talking in the name of Plastivida. We are at your disposal for this, but also the Plasti. Everyone is interested that this happens. So look for us, and it will be wonderful to work with you to evolve and be a reference in Brazil in this important program for the sector. Thank you very much. Thank you, Miguel Bahiense, President of Plastivida, for his excellent presentation. We now have a few minutes for questions and answers that are done by our attendees. The first one is the following. Marine pollution can be microparticles for textile plastics. You can't see them. What alternatives or solutions for this type of problem? Well, I believe that the important point is that we be able to qualify the origins of this type of material. As I said, the macroplastics have a defined volume. You notice a mass. You see it on the beaches. There, this type of microplastics that we have to understand. We have to get a better way to avoid them getting to the seas. Once I participated in an event where the, the people would, the NGOs did some work going to the sea with nets to measure the quantity of microplastic, and they were doing this, and whoever did this would get a T-shirt. So this was something that ended up by generating resources for the project. But we could have think, well, how am I going to use a T-shirt that's going to let out microfibers in the sea? I'm not going to need it. Whoever bought it is not going to use it a lot. We're going to wash it, and then we're going to show these microfibers, and then the boat goes and fetches my microfiber. It's a bit crazy thing. So the idea is to have the awareness on the consumer side, and that companies try to produce non-polluting products with this material that is not visible to the human eye. So, and evolve with a product that doesn't allow for this type of pollution. Another question that is arriving here, the B2B, to select certified companies is easier. How can the consumer be give prestige to these programs with their pellets? Well, I particularly understand that specification is a bit distant to the consumer reality. But the companies that work with this, they can declare themselves partners for the pellet zero. What they're never going to be able to do is to try to sell their products saying that they're more environmentally friendly than that other company that's not pellet zero. I don't want to have any, we don't want to have any brainwashing. We want the companies to say, we do our part. We are part of a process that avoids pellets going to the sea, because the perception of the consumers to buy or to opt for a certain company goes with your awareness. We don't want to make this a commercial tool. There are clear rules about the possibility of losing the certification if we detect such a movement. And for us licensors, if this is identified by the owners of the brand, we can even lose the right of licensing. So it has to be very well understood. Society in general has to have environmental education, learn and involve themselves to take a decision. But we do not want the company to make this into a business tool. Miguel, Carolina Henrique de Souza Borba's question. She says, congratulations for your talk. What happens if the company does not advance in some of the steps and then the company doesn't get its start? What happens? Is there a training process? What happens? Well, thank you for the praise. We believe that we don't want to have don't want to be like the police and put a knife in your at your throat, but we want to establish a dialogue so there's no problem. As I said here, several companies signed this term to implement up to 2020, but one of them started and is seeing internally how they can do this. We can't say, look, you're out of the process. No, we want to be a partner so that we can say, well, what is the challenge and how can we contribute to the solution? So we think that this time frame of 2 years is enough for the implementation, but if in each one of the steps or between the first, second, third, fourth star, things go on for a long time. We have to be understanding. We have the responsibility to survey the implementation, but we would not then we can't allow them to sign the certification with 1 star and then with time they don't implement anything at all. Obviously that cannot happen. So we try to always be sort of midterm to dialogue. I think this is the secret of the plastic circularity, so that the dialogue is what goes on. So recycling in the pellet zero, where the actor is the industry and the responsible part is the industry itself. Thank you very much once more for your participation, Miguel Bahiense in the Brazilian Congress of Plastic. Thank you so much. Thank you.